Wonder Woman is out, and I'll kind of skip to the punchline. It feels good to like a DC movie. I gotta get used to this feeling again. It's very unfamiliar for quite a while now. So, yes, I have seen Wonder Woman, and I have enjoyed it quite a bit. I have a feeling this is going to get into spoilers before too long, because some of the things I want to talk about specifically are spoilery, and I'm not going to do a separate video on that because I don't have a big, overall message to go along with my spoiler thoughts. But I'll try and get the spoiler free out of the way. It is good. It's very good. I personally hesitate to call it great because there are a number of things holding it back, some of which I kind of have to save a little bit for spoilers. But the things that bothered me do not break the film. They are aspects, one of which I'm actually kind of two minds on, because there's one thing I don't like about it, one thing that I do. Part of it has to do with the origin story they went with. Wonder Woman has had a number of different origins over the years. The one they went with is one that I personally don't favor, but the film handles that pretty well. So that's more my issue with the specific piece of source material they chose to pull that from. So I'll set that aside as well. The performances are good. Gal Gadot is terrific in this part. She is a wonderful presence, and she really is terrifically cast. I wasn't completely sold on her in BVS. Not that there was anything wrong with what she did, but I felt like I didn't see enough of the character's personality to actually get a full sense of whether she worked. She does. She's great. Chris Pine, terrific as Steve Trevor, brings just enough levity, yet also sells himself as someone who is just buried in this war that he wishes wasn't going on. It sells that very well. Most of the rest of the supporting cast does very well too. Some of them are a little one note, but that happens. Nothing's perfect. Etta Candy didn't grate on me. She was pretty well handled. There are some companions to Steve Trevor that I actually think work better in terms of selling the camaraderie of that team than, say, the Howling Commandos were done in Captain America: The First Avenger. The action is well done. I can follow it. The music is great, even though they still use that Wonder Woman theme that appeared in BVS, which I still don't like. But the moments that they chose to play that theme in this movie, it did actually work for. And the rest of the music, I liked a lot. I'm seriously considering picking up this soundtrack. It's interesting, I was talking to my friend Ryan as we were coming out, and he pointed out that the overall tone of this thing is still pretty dark. It's pretty heavy because it is, being a World War I, and it's the story of Diana coming to man's world and seeing seeing something so bad that it's going to make her kind of swear off the world of men for a while, which is, what we already knew coming in from BVS. So it was going to have to be dark. So it's not a lighter movie, but it does have a specific key component that, say, BVS absolutely did not have, and that is a beacon. A sense of hope and something to grab onto as being, okay, this is dark and things are bad, but here is our thing to grab onto and clutch to and go, okay, this can make us better. And that is appropriately Wonder Woman herself. In terms of the writing, the way the characters use, the way Gal Gadot plays her, she really is, and very much in the same way that Captain America, the character and the portrayal were what truly elevated that first Captain America film. She does a similar thing here, and I'm not just making that comparison because they're both period war movies. The characters serve similar functions, and they fulfill those functions equally as well in their respective movies. I think I'm going to start to get into spoilers a little bit from here, so if you don't want any more than that, move along. I am going to get into my criticisms right now because I want to end on a positive note and end on why these criticisms that I have don't kill the movie, because usually I do my criticisms on the tail end. So, stuff that's a little rough. Diana's naivete is something I'm of two minds of. There were moments, particularly in regards to her persistent belief that if she can just find and kill Ares, the war will just end. And it's so obvious right off the bat, like, that's not going to be how it works. So her insistence that that's going to work, I didn't like it. It just sort of knowing that absolutely was not going to be how it played out. So her sincere insistence on it, and I understand why she's like that. I'm not saying it's unjustified. I just didn't like it. That having been said, they pay it off well towards the end when she does in fact realize, no, this is not just Ares, and that men are causing this, and they are doing this to themselves, and they are not what she thought they were. And that moment and that scene between her and Steve Trevor plays really, really well. So I didn't like that function of her character, but it pays off well. And some of the other moments that where her naivete is played for work well as well, like when she asked, what's marriage? And that little moment plays well. So that aspect of her character did give some good moments, but also gave some of the more painful moments for me personally, at any rate. The climax and the ending is reminds me a little bit too much of BVS in the sense of, that very end in BVS, the Doomsday fight. And it's, that noise and fury and CGI, and I sort of lost the thread a little bit. I didn't completely check out because thankfully it held an emotional center that I don't think BVS was able to do. And so that kind of muscles through on that basis. But the climax, at least in terms of the final confrontation, was not the emotional or the action highlight of the film. There are still good emotional beats going on in the climax, but they're related to Steve as opposed to what she has going on with Ares. Ares I'll talk about briefly. David Thewlis actually plays him pretty well, and there's an interesting twist on him, and there's more nuance to the character than I was expecting in terms of his not necessarily wanting to cause war, because war feeds his power, which is the more traditional sort of comic book version of Ares. Instead, it's no, none of the other gods understand. Man is awful, and through war we can get them to destroy themselves because we got to get rid of these things. That was an interesting take, and I actually think David Thewlis brought a fair amount of gravitas to his portrayal of that. There were a couple of goofy moments. He had this flashback, but they still had the mustache on him, and that did actually cause laughter in the screening that I was at. Speaking of visuals that didn't quite work, there's some green screen in this, really bad. There's a shot early on of young Diana. The young and teenage Dianas we get, very good by the way, but there's a shot early on of young Diana, and she does this jump down, and it's it's on her, and the background's going behind her. It's really, really bad. I think in some ways you can see because this had a lower budget than something like BVS had. It's not like a low budget movie, but you can kind of see where the effects aren't quite up to the same standard that we've seen from these. And while there are some interesting shades to Ares, some of the other villains like Danny Houston, who is an actor who I normally really like, he's very one note, which I get to a certain extent. They were really trying to sell him as a red herring in terms of saying, he's Ares. So I get why he's that way, but it is a little disappointing. Dr. Poison was an interesting visual. I actually kind of really liked the unnerving, uncanny valleyness of that cracked mask piece they had for her, but ultimately she's just she's a glorified henchman. She plays well enough. And coming back to Diana's origin a little bit, while I'm not going to complain about how this is not my preferred version of her origin, I will say that they telegraph really early on and really blatantly that her origin that was told to her by her mother obviously is not the case. I'm not sure they played that entirely right. But here's the thing. For everything that I just complained about, doesn't sink the movie, doesn't even come close, because there is one thing that this film does better than certainly any other DC movie, better than a lot of the Marvel movies. What it does really well is rousing, is triumph, and again, embodied in Diana herself. So when she is going to steal that sword and she's realizing her own power, she's climbing the wall, that just huge grin. The best scene in the movie, in my mind by far, is when she goes out onto that battlefield, and she goes out into no man's land, and she faces that army, and that scene, and then going into what happens in the village after that it is rousing. It gets you pumped up, and it gives you this sense of hope and yes. And part of the reason it sells that so well is that it contrasts really well with the fact that the movie does make a point of showing how horrible this war is. And so while it is kind of a dark and awful world, in this case, it feels much more justified that the world is like that than, say, with BVS, where it just kind of seemed like it was like that because we wanted to make the film dark. Here, it is dark and depressing and an awful place, but it feeds into the message. It feeds into why Diana feels the need to try and stop all this, and it elevates the moment when she gets to be that beacon of hope. And again, that beacon of hope is very much what BVS was lacking. So for me, this thing does those triumphant, rousing moments so well. It plasters over a lot of sins, pretty much all of them. Again, because those issues still exist, I do hesitate to call the movie great, but it is very, very good. I am very happy that I saw it, and it is by a mile better than anything else that the DCEU has put out. So those are my thoughts on Wonder Woman. What are yours? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast or the Punch Like a Girl podcast, available on separate feeds on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, this council is adjourned.